Well, I'm shocked and and grieved, even though I didn't really know that much um, about the guy. Talking about Charlie Kirk, which I'm sure you've all heard of. I I had I just saw that thing, he got shot in the neck, and then we didn't hear anything, and I was like, at first I was thinking, oh, he's definitely dead. But then I heard he was in critical condition, and I heard that, I was like, oh, okay, he's fine. And I was actually talking to a customer on the phone, and the guy mentioned that they're talking about Charlie Kirk on TV, and I was like, yeah, well, it sounds like he's going to make it. He's like, no, he's dead. And I don't know. The I um I wasn't Charlie Kirk's target audience. Again, I had nothing against the guy. My views towards him were positive. It's just that like to me, he was always like milk toast MAGA, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that's the it's important. I think he was doing important work. Talking to younger voters and stuff. But when I guess to me, it always felt like, because I mean, I didn't really hear a lot of his stuff. I just saw like the clips of him like trolling liberals and stuff, and it's just like, which is like, it's basically another version of what Shapiro does, and that just like, I just think it's dumb. It may have some practical benefit, but I think it's dumb. And importantly, with that, like, what I associated Charlie Kirk with mostly was the war against the Groypers, which I still don't even know what that was about. I'm assuming it was about Israel, but I mean, I don't know. I remember that happening like back in 2020 or something. My understanding is that he doesn't like, Charlie Kirk is like, if he's non-interventionist, he basically just doesn't talk about that stuff. So I know that, but other than that, like, other than the Groypers, if you're talking about like what he's famous for and stuff, it seemed to me like it was very heavily into this trans stuff, which it's an issue that I've always regarded as a huge distraction. You can think about, seriously, I don't care what anybody's position is on it, but it's not something that emotionally means anything to me, because it's like the only people who get hurt by the trans stuff are women. And why should like any guy in the West do anything to protect women? For women's sports and stuff. Like, look, I think that I mean, yeah, it is unfair to, like, for women's sports to have to give, but the thing is, it's like women were, pretty gung ho about, like lots of other stuff, like that bad stuff that the left does, and I just don't feel like obligated to stick up for them as a group. And so and then as far as I know, women are still more sympathetic with trans stuff than men are. So why should we, or I, or however you want to say it, care more about women than they themselves do? It doesn't make any sense to me. But look, fine, if you don't like the trans stuff, that's fine. I don't. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is the focusing on it as an issue. It's a distraction. You younger guys won't remember, but there was a similar thing about this back in like 2004, when Bush like really focused on protecting marriage, being anti-gay marriage, forced the Democrats to have to defend the politically unpopular gay marriage stuff. Because it used to be being anti-gay was politically good, and the Democrats being pro-gay was something that hurt them. And I, like, in 2004, like, I guess I wasn't really in favor of gay marriage, but I was like, who cares? It's a distraction. It's such like a cheap issue. It's a way to like sop to your base, but not actually do anything for it. Like, let's say that trans, like, just didn't exist. Like, that, like, all, transgender stuff stopped tomorrow. Like, how would that make the situation vis-a-vis immigration any better? And, like, I would totally, like, if you had somebody who was, like, hardcore into all that trans stuff, maybe even trans themselves, but was anti-immigration, I would be, much more favorably inclined to that politician than to some politician who's really anti, because, they've tried that in, like, the UK before the last election. They're like, oh, we're still going to be pro-immigration. We're just going to be really, really anti-trans. It's like, no, that doesn't do anything. It doesn't do any good. So, I mean, but I'm here not to, I just think it's a distraction. I think it's a shiny object for the rubes, and maybe Charlie Kirk was kind of playing into all of that. But I mean, that's as far as it goes. I still think, like I said, I still think seemed like he was a really nice guy, a really good guy. I think his heart was in the right place. My understanding is that he had come to start to see, like, legal immigration, not just illegal immigration, as a bad thing. So, he was making progress. But the thing is, like, whatever you think about the guy, he was on the Trumpist side of the coalition. My question and concern is, was it somebody on the left that killed him? Or was it like a Groyper type? Because, if it's a Groyper type, then there's not going to be any we're not going to get anything politically advantageous out of this. Which doesn't matter. I mean, what matters is that what happened to him, that he's gone, and that his kids don't have a father, or his wife doesn't have a husband. I'm not trying to be cynical about it. I'm just recognizing reality. But if it is somebody on the left, it really brings to the issue of political violence to the fore. And, I think that I'm somebody who really thinks like a leftist and thinks like a liberal. That's the thing. Because you'll notice that that leftist and non-leftist people not even people on the right, but just leftists and non-leftists think in completely different ways. And my thinking patterns are much more like a leftist. And because, what you're going to see about all this is people, like, just denouncing political violence. And that doesn't work for me. Political violence is like terrorism. I guess terrorism is a type of political violence. Like, I'm not willing to say that political violence is always and anywhere wrong. I think that violence is always regrettable and unseemly, but there's times where it's necessary. And I would say, yeah, there's times in politics where at least it could theoretically be necessary. And the thing is, like, if you really, like, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that it was somebody on the left who assassinated Kirk. This person presumably believed that Kirk really was pursuing the physical extermination of trans and immigrants, and was trying to turn America into Nazi Germany or whatever. And in which case, like, can you really say that that violence is necessarily wrong in that case, if that's the only way to prevent somebody like Kirk instigating hundreds, thousands, potentially millions of other murders? That's what happened with it was a little after 9/11. Some guy somewhere in Northern Europe, I think Holland, I'm not sure, gay guy, got he was Pimfutian, I think his name was. He, like, was, said as like some kind of right-wing extremist, but he really wasn't. He was just said that, like, we already have enough immigrants, we need to stop immigration. And then, of course, to liberals, that's Nazism. So some, whack job liberal killed him. And in his trial, this guy said that, like, I think murder is abhorrent. I hated doing what I had to do, but I had to do it to, like, stop the, murders of millions, potentially millions of other people that wouldn't have, yeah, he was like, he really did view it as it would be like assassinating Hitler in 1939 or something. And so I don't think there's a real easy answer. I think, what you can say is that, like what I've talked about before, about how anger and hatred, cloud your judgment. And if violence is something that you do want to do, like, get to a time where you think violence is necessary, I think that's where it's really important to not be angry and not be hateful, because how do you know then, is this violence really necessary? Like, do I absolutely have to do this? Or am I just so blinded by rage that I want to do this? And, if it, like, imagine that, again, imagine everybody in the world still believed the same stuff. They all, like, they all, like, believe that, each individual person believes the same things that individual person believes now, but they had no anger, no hate, no ill will. I bet you there'd be a lot less violence, even if the beliefs were all the same. Because, sometimes beliefs are irreconcilable, and even if there's no hate, there's still going to be violence because there's no other way to resolve the issue. And, but a lot of violence is totally unnecessary because it's totally motivated by hate or rage or something like that. And that's probably the case with this guy who killed Charlie Kirk. I presume it's a guy. And, for me, I would have been a lot angrier about what happened if it had happened during Trump's first term. During Trump's first term, I was more in favor of political violence, and, it's because I felt like we were losing, and we were under siege, and I was, I felt like I was angrier, but I was scared too, and I felt like, we had our backs to the wall, and, I don't feel that way anymore. It's clear that I don't know how things are ultimately going to shake out, but right now, in the Western world in general, but in America in particular, the right is at a stronger position than the left. That wasn't the case during Trump's first term. It is the case now. Exhibit A is the Sydney Sweeney ad. I mean, like, yeah, on the surface, it's just a stupid ad. It's not going to change anything. It's not that it has any influence. It's that what it shows, how the culture. That ad could never have been released in 2017, 2018, 2019. And, it's just a different cultural moment, which would never have happened without, the insanity during Trump's years burning out, the George Floyd riots, the COVID overreach, and then Biden's term being, the inflation during Biden's term. I always say that for peace and prosperity are the ultimate enemy to the right. When you have peace and prosperity, that's how you get your Obamas, and stuff like that. Another thing, though, but the thing is, that's how I feel as somebody on the right. Maybe I hadn't really appreciated that people on the left feel the other way around, because, I'm just thinking about, like, the rank and file liberals, in my family and the ones that I know. They were scared during Trump's first term. They were scared and angry. Right now, they still hate Trump. They would never vote for him. They'll vote against him. But they hate Trump. the same, but they're not deranged like they were in Trump's first term. And part of that's just being used to it. Part of that's because even subconsciously they knew there needed to be a change, just like, we all subconsciously knew that. Sorry, I got a message. We all subconsciously knew. You younger guys don't remember, but people who voted Republican in 2008 all subconsciously knew that, like, when Obama won, it's like, yeah, we needed a change, and people knew that, like, so some of that's some of it, but a lot of it is because, like what I've talked about before, on the issues, liberals aren't very liberal. Like, I can tell you, again, with the exception of my brother, who's a true believer, like leftist Bernie AOC type, but the other liberals in my family, imagine Gavin Newsom came out, and was like, yeah, we really need to get tough on crime. We may even have to use the National Guard at some points. He probably couldn't get away with that because of what Trump is saying, but he wouldn't go that far. But we have to get really tough on crime. We have to put these offenders in a long way. Maybe even use the term super predators that Hillary got in trouble for. Anti-white discrimination has become a problem. We can't have that anymore. And we've had too much immigration. There's just we can't sustain the same rate of immigration. We need an immigration policy that puts the American worker first, and we need to slow down immigration until we've assimilated these millions of immigrants we've bought over the last whatever many years and stuff. So all this like stuff that like people on the right could get behind. He could go and say all that stuff. Dude, my family, your like typical suburban liberal, would love that. They would go crazy. They would be like, yes, Gavin, our Messiah, lead us to the promised land, because they don't care about immigrants. They don't care about minorities. They never did. It's a pure status signaling thing for them. And so it's just, they want their tribe to rule. So, if they're like, and that's just the thing. And they don't think independently. They're just like, they go by what their leaders say. Because, and this is another thing. I think I've talked about this before. In 2008, right, after Obama won, there was a lot of talk. And this talk would continue, especially after Romney lost. There was this idea, as somebody who reads a lot of liberal stuff, they were all just like, well, the people who control the Republican Party will just force the Republican voters to go along with immigration, to go along with mass immigration. Because that's the way they think. They're like, well, the leaders say it, and then the followers do it. And then when Trump first came on the scene, they started saying like, oh, well, we don't have to worry because the people who run the Republican Party won't let it happen. Because in their mind, it's just like the voters don't get a say. In their mind, it's just like, well, the leaders are going to say no to Trump, and that'll be it. And like, I remember talking to my brother, my brother-in-law, and my mom, back in 2015, and they said, who do you think is going to win they were talking about some Republican, and I said, oh, he's got no chance to win. I think it might have even been Jeb Bush. And my brother was like, well, then who do you think is going to win the Republican nomination? And I said, Donald Trump. And they all broke out laughing. They thought I was joking. They were like, because they were just like, well, that can't happen because the leaders wouldn't let it. And so like, it didn't make sense to them. Like, so the voters are anti-immigration and stuff, but it's like, but it doesn't matter because the leaders say that you should be pro-immigration. So that's that. So the Democrats, though, they just do what their leaders say. So if Gavin Newsom and, he gets to like Jon Stewart or Colbert behind him, it's like, no, we've had too much immigration. We need to reduce it until things like that. We need to get off this. There can't be any boys and girls sports. We need to be really tough on crime. They would all fall in line behind it. They would be like, yeah, absolutely. Like, you'd see them say like, yeah, we need to secure our borders. Absolutely. Stuff like that. Free speech, things like that. Anyway, the other thing I want to talk about is just the whole like free speech and dialogue thing. And I think that's another part of like what makes Charlie Kirk kind of like why he was kind of a provocateur. It's not really for what he said per se, it's where he said it. Like he went on to leftist turf and talked about that, and they tried to use the heckler's veto on him and deplatform him. And eventually the only way to deplatform him completely was to kill him, unfortunately. And, so it goes into this whole thing of cancel culture and stuff. And it's different because, like, when the right talks about free speech and open exchange of ideas, they really mean it. They really think, well, everybody should be, allowed to say what they want. When the left say, because, historically, free speech was a left thing. Like, it was only when, Trump came along that they started mocking it as freeze peach, like freeze frozen peach, as they started being against it because they were the ones holding the whip and they don't believe. So they never believed in it in any absolute sense, which is fine. I don't believe in it either. I'm just saying, like I said, I think like a leftist. But like, okay, so people on the right really believe in it, and then the left goes and tries to shut them down, and then the right, complains about cancel culture. But the thing is, cancel culture has always existed. It really has in America. I know I've told you guys this story before. But there's a scene in the 1980s movies, The Blues Brothers, where some neo-Nazis are marching, and they get like, I think it's not like deliberate. It's like the Blues Brothers are on some kind of chase or something, and they end up accidentally pushing them, like pushing these marching neo-Nazis into a river or something like that. And it's a joke that everybody, like, it's supposed to be like, haha, yeah, like those neo-Nazis, are getting, deplatformed or thing. Because in the 1980s, that would be something that everybody would have just been cool with. It's just like, that is beyond the pale for acceptable discourse. So people, even then, in like 80s, 90s, whatever, were okay with deplatforming certain speech. What changed is where the line gets drawn. You had this new generation of leftists that start saying, like, more and more stuff is unacceptable. And you get to a point where if everything's unacceptable, nothing is. And I mean, really, that's it. In the 80s and 90s, there was political consensus about what could be said, what could be discussed. And all that changed was that consensus disappeared. Now there's no longer, actually, even today, we have consensus about stuff that you're still just basically not allowed to say. And if you do, you'll get deplatformed and nobody will take up for you. There's less of that now than there was in the past. So you want to talk about free speech? We have way more now than we did in the 90s. So yeah, but the thing is like what Charlie Kirk was doing, like, I was always like, stuff like the Proud Boys, like when they would go into cities and do their thing, I was pretty against that because my feeling was like, well, the cities belong to the left. So it's not a moral thing. It's just that, like, why, like, how they run their own house isn't going to affect you one way or the other. It's just it's a distraction. It's a waste of resources. It's how I felt like about the whole like anti-Semitism on college campuses thing. It's like, yeah, but the colleges belong to the left. So there's no, like, what's the point of trying to fight them about how they run their own stuff? And that doesn't make any sense. Now, the thing with the colleges, if you're going to actually use that as a way to defund the colleges or just to humiliate them, okay, fine. But the Proud Boys thing is harder to justify. It's like these Proud Boy types would get themselves hurt, killed, or arrested for no discernible payoff. But a guy like Charlie Kirk, it's a little tougher to say. Like, yeah, to me, maybe to most of you, what he was just doing was, distracted trolling. It was just dumb and, dumb and pointless. But I don't know, maybe it was making more of a difference than we'd realize, getting it out there. And when you have this normie guy who is engaging and can, like, talk to more normie types, and also be like against legal immigration, that is helpful. I mean, it's just bad about what happened. So I guess, what I feel like, because if this had happened in 2018 or whatever, it would be easier for me to say every liberal in America is personally responsible for this, and they need to pay. And I don't feel like I can say that this time, because the mindset of the liberals doesn't seem to be there from what I mean, maybe I'm wrong. If I have any liberal viewers or have any people with liberals in their family, you can tell me if you think that, they are supportive of this, that they think, it's a good thing. Now, I know that the hardcore leftists are celebrating, they're happy, and I do hold them responsible. But I don't know if I can hold the rank and file liberal responsible for this the same way I could in 2018, because I know that they supported the violence back then. I live in a family with them, right? This time I don't think so, though. So, so when people if people are talking about violence or revenge, revenge on who? who are you going to go get revenge on? And maybe that makes it worse. That's all for now. See you in the next.